Afternoon, everybody. Hello and welcome to the NETA webinar, our conversation with Governor Deval Patrick, what it means to be an American today. I want to welcome all of you that have joined us. I want to thank my NETA partners and staff and associates for helping me put these webinars together. I'm very grateful for the support. And I want to thank you, Governor Patrick, for joining us today and participating in this conversation with me. Welcome, Governor.
Thank you very much, Phil. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Good to hear your voice and good to see you. I also want to welcome, in conjunction with me, the Mass Business Roundtable. I'm on the board of directors, and I reach out to the board and to the staff, J.G. Chesloff and Chris Keeley and Caitlin Hamilton, to join us. And they have joined us today, as had members of the board. Bob Rivers, board chair, is on the phone today. The roundtable on the issues of social equity, social justice, and diversity and inclusion has been really aggressive. And since May, we've had a number of programs addressing the issue of social and racial justice. And so I know Quincy Miller is on the phone today. He leads a group of corporate executives that are addressing the issue, and we've had a number of programs. So I want to welcome the board and members of the Mass Business Roundtable. Governor, I got a bunch of topics to talk about today. I want to start with kind of the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is COVID-19. When we started back in March, we were all caught up. I wonder
where you were going to go with that, Bill, because there are a couple of 800-pound gorillas in the room.
Well, I said one. There could be others, and there are some others. But on this one, though, it's just, I felt I had to start the conversation recognizing the public health crisis that we are living in. And the numbers going back up. Back in March, we were caught off guard. We weren't prepared in any way. We didn't know much. And there's still some questions that go unanswered. And then back in, was it June or so, folks said, well, wait, we might have a surge or another uptick in the fall. And that is here. That is here now. Mm-hmm. Deaths across the country, more cases. Mm-hmm. And the debate is, of course, how we have handled this, So my question really is to you, and it's a direct question with many layers underneath it. What should we be doing?
Oh boy.
President-elect Biden has formed a group of experts, and some are from here, as you know, Atul Gawande and Dr. Murthy. Mm-hmm. What should we be doing? Dr. Fauci says we should have a national program, you know. So what do you think because you are impacted like all of us?
I think, Bill, first of all, I want to acknowledge, as you just did, that we have all been affected. Our lives, our plans, our schooling, all of it's been turned upside down. And we were saying just before we got on camera that you know, we're feeling very blessed in my family because we've been here in Western Massachusetts pretty much constantly since March, and in a place with enough room outside for the family to be and to be able to get out and move around and stay reasonably isolated from others. But and we've tried to maintain that because Diana's compromised as a cancer survivor, and my sister is managing her way through breast cancer now. We have a brand new granddaughter, 4 weeks old, and her moms are super careful about her health. But everybody is tired. You know, we love each other, but we'd love to see our friends. We'd love to travel again. We'd love to be back at work and back in our routines. Homeschooling is no joke, I can tell you. So I think we have suffered through what would anyway be a really, really big challenge from the fact that we don't have common and consistent guidance. And it's not, I mean, the notion that you can even manage this state by state when the virus doesn't recognize state lines is absurd. So, I mean, lots of folks have commented on and talked about and reflected on the lack of federal leadership. I can tell you that I think as early as tomorrow, the former governor of Idaho, Dirk Kempthorne, a Republican, and I, as chairs of something called the COVID Collaborative, are going to roll out with the support, we hope, of a whole bunch of governors, but of organizations ranging from the United States Chamber of Commerce to the NAACP nationally, a set of common science-based guidelines on everything from testing to eventual distribution of a vaccine, based on gathering together the best scientists, the best epidemiologists, public health experts, again, just to try to get everybody on the same page, because I think it is something the science tells us we can overcome, but we have to be consistent about it. And the notion, if I can just say one other thing, Bill.
Of course.
Of having, you know, either a fully functioning economy or, you know, the safety of the public's health is another one of these false choices we get all the time in politics and in our political rhetoric. They are connected. And we can have both. And we frankly will only get to both if we connect the two.
Thank you for that. I think that, you know, it's something that we're all feeling, and we watch the news and we're all concerned as we go about our daily activities. You must feel good in terms of Massachusetts, in terms of the biotech industry, and it being recognized now and contributing so strong. And it was a strong part of your administration, recognizing the importance of that industry here. You must feel good about seeing it play this role.
I feel really good about it. I mean, you know, we took a lot of heat, and sometimes still do, about this notion of picking winners and losers, and how that's not the role of government. I always made the point we were never about picking losers, and we weren't certainly about ignoring the other business opportunities and strengths, job creation and wealth creation opportunities and strengths in Massachusetts. But every state plays to its strengths, and or ought to. And ours is a concentration of brain power. We've talked about this before, Bill, in settings just like this. You know, we have, 300 colleges, universities, research institutions, teaching hospitals within 45 minutes of downtown Boston. There is not another such concentration of brain power on the planet. And so there are certain kinds of industries that really depend on that kind of concentration of brain power. Clean tech is one, by the way, which flourished purposefully when we were in office, and biotech is another. There are others. And I think that what we have to be about is not just kind of what we can do in the moment, but what we can do that builds a future over time. It may or may not be biotech over time. We should be thinking about the next thing, right? Yeah. But that's this notion of what you do now that leaves things better for those who come behind you, I think is, I mean, that's not a political lesson. That's a life lesson every one of us got from our grandparents, and that's really what the encouragement and the investment in the life sciences industry was about.
You mentioned the healthcare. I mean, we did see the healthcare community, from community health centers to all the major hospitals, and all come together as part of the control, the control center, and offering expertise. So we're so fortunate to have that expertise here, and they really have running the field hospitals and all those kinds of things, you know. And we opened up another one this week. But thank you for that. And I think that that's a backdrop even for the new administration, is how they're going to, as part of their agenda, has to be this, and how they're going to deal in this environment. It's going to be
In the new administration in Washington, you mean?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm hopeful. I think it's going to be, I think, you know, I've known Joe Biden for, gosh, 30 years. And I like him tremendously. I think it's going to turn out, and I say this as a one-time, you know, brief competitor. I think it's going to turn out he is exactly the right person for the moment. And I am certain, because I've watched and I've listened and I've talked to him, that he's been listening to the importance of not being a nostalgic president, meaning, you know, just trying to return us to the age of Barack Obama, who would agree and has said, that's not what we need right now. What we need right now is a combination of healing and reconciliation, and some big ideas that will make a big difference in people's lives. And he's got a couple of those big ideas, and he's surrounded by others with big ideas, and he's a pretty good listener. So I hope we see some bold action soon.
Well, I'm going to ask you next about the presidency and then your thoughts just now. But you know, do you remember that we had lunch back a number of years ago, when right after you gave that great speech at the Democratic Convention for the second Obama administration, and you and I had lunch, and you asked me a question. You said, "Bill, what do you see me doing after being governor?" And I don't even remember my answer, but my answer was, "I thought you were running for president." And you gave me a big laugh, and then you did run for president.
But just for 15 minutes.
Well, what would Andy Warhol say, I guess? But for running for president, your experience, what did you learn or take away from that, particularly about the American people?
Yeah.
And I know we're going to talk about your new podcast in a few moments, and then I do want to get into the Biden-Harris administration. But what did you take away from that when you did decide to no longer be in the campaign?
So I think there were a couple of things. First of all, you know, I was, I think when we had that lunch, at best ambivalent about running. It's not something I always wanted to do. I really loved being governor. As you know, we don't have term limits, but I have a term limit named Diane, and she said 2 terms is enough. And I was enjoying being back in the private sector. I was building a new business. It was really cutting edge. It was, you know, fundamentally about how to rethink capitalism itself and how to reorient that to more long-term than short-term thinking. I think we made some tremendous progress, and our model for a lot of other imitators, or I mean to be more complimentary than that, but others who have launched similar kinds of impact initiatives and sustainability kinds of focus. So I felt really great about that. But I worry about the country. I've worried about the country in particular during Donald Trump's time, not because I was surprised or even shocked by his election. I was not. But because I felt that the one truth he spoke as a candidate, when he talked about how folks, that for an awful lot of people, establishment or conventional politics isn't working for them, is the same truth that Barack Obama spoke. And I believe it. I feel that most people don't feel connected to their government. They don't feel served by their government. And I think there are a bunch of reasons for that. I didn't believe that Donald Trump cared about that. And I think we can argue about it, but I think that the record is pretty strong that he didn't do much about that. But I do think that that is a long-term foundational problem in this country. And then what I saw him do instead was bring division in as a central feature of his governance. And I believed then and still do that that risks long-term damage to the democracy. I think it has caused long-term damage to the democracy that will outlast his time in office. And the list of outrages is so long that, it turns out democracy depends on a whole bunch of unwritten rules, right? Rules about integrity and decorum and restraint and duty. It all sounds so old-fashioned, but actually, it's how it works. And he every day just pushed. I'm all for doing new things, but just pushing away some of the norms and expectations that bind us. And I think that is deeply worrisome and deeply, deeply dangerous. So I thought hard about running, and I even organized to do so. We even had a date to announce, and about 2-3 weeks before the announcement, my wife Diane was diagnosed with uterine cancer, and so we stepped back from that and shut all that down because focusing on her. I mean, she's cancer-free today, thank God.
That's great.
Thank you. But we didn't know that then, and it just didn't seem right to be trying to do something that was completely all-consuming while she was dealing with this. So I stepped back, and I was content to step back because it was a big, deep, talented pool with a bunch of my friends in it. But candidly, I saw how kind of caught up in the sort of celebrity of campaigning and the shorthand of campaigning, even my friends became, and how we were falling for the same false choices that always get peddled in campaigns. I am a proud Democrat. I don't think you have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat. I don't think you have to hate business to be a social justice warrior. I don't think you have to hate police to believe Black Lives Matter. But this is what we get. It's all binary. It's like we were talking earlier about COVID. You either have to protect people's health or have a thriving business community. It's ridiculous. You have to have both, and you have to connect them. And so I was afraid that we were on a course of, as Democrats, on a course of alienating many of the people who want to be, and I believe need to be, our allies. And so I thought, well, geez, and I kept getting messages from folks in politics, in the media, folks I knew and didn't, you should reconsider, it's not too late, it's not too late. Well, it turns out it was too late when I did get in. And I think that was the first lesson. It is a big country, it takes a lot of time, especially if you're not already famous and a celebrity. It takes a lot of time to build a campaign. I think Democrats were in overload because we had so many great candidates and campaigns, and they had been operating for a long, long time. And folks had either, made their choice or narrowed their choices to a few. So that was hard. But those are some of the practical parts that I learned. I shouldn't have been surprised by them, but they were realities. I think and by the way, I think the media was an overload. the idea of having these town halls, that was an idea that we worked out, a year and a half before they had the town halls with CNN. And by the time I got in, they were so overloaded that they were trying to figure out how not to have additional town halls. And because I wasn't polling at, high numbers, I didn't get one, and they didn't get around to giving me one until the eve of the New Hampshire primary. So it takes time. It's a big country, it takes time. But I think substantively, one of the things I learned is something I had suspected and something I had seen helping in the midterms bill and in Doug Jones's special election in 2017. And that is that the economic uncertainty, even fragility, and social isolation and despair, measured by things like opioid addiction rates or suicide rates, that I knew from Black communities, is now something that people are feeling all over the place, all kinds of communities. And that the economic indicators, and this is I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but I was invited to a convening of economists, Democrat and Republican, because now everybody's on a side, but a small group, policymakers and economists, Nobel laureates at Yale 2 years ago, I think it was, and it was convened by a former colleague of mine in the Clinton administration who was comptroller of the currency. And as I say, small group, maybe 30 people in the room. I was the only elected official there, and was mostly just listening. And they made a point from the perspective of expertise that I had sensed, which is that the economic indicators that we use to measure the strength of the economy don't actually describe what matters to how people live. Unemployment was low before COVID, but you had to count the 2 and 3 low-wage jobs people were working in order to get there. You understand what I mean? Just to survive to get there. Inflation is low, we are told, but not if you have to pay a tuition bill or a healthcare premium or rent. And I'm not just talking about in Boston, I'm talking about in lots and lots of places. The stuff, you see it in the kinds of community you and I lived in, wonderful leafy communities, suburbs, but still folks using the local food pantry and their credit card to make ends meet. There is a vulnerability and a fragility in our economy that affects a lot of things in our social lives and choices as well, that was exposed by COVID. It was there before COVID, and we weren't, it seemed to me, really speaking to that. We were speaking more our version, it felt to me, more our version of grievance as a counterweight to the other side's version of grievance or grievances. So
the point that you made there, the story came out during the COVID is people who were once contributors to food pantries would donate to food pantries were now coming to get their food, and they showed people who were the donors were now the beneficiaries. That was a big story.
Sure.
In April and May.
Yeah.
Going forward with the election, on the presidential election, President-elect Biden has said he will be a president for all Americans. And so my question really is for you to address is, what should he do, or what steps should he take to demonstrate inclusiveness and try to close the divide? I want you to think about the first 100 days.
Yeah.
First 100 days, always important. And then what does the election of Senator Harris mean for the country, particularly the Black community, the minority community, but for all of us? So I know I put a couple thoughts together there.
Yeah.
But no, I know, and they're all singular, but I guess the broad question is, what is the Biden-Harris? You talked about it a bit. What does it mean for us, and how do you see it moving forward?
So I think that, there are some big policy decisions, all of them or most of them urgent, some with immediate consequences like the next COVID relief package, and some with longer term consequences about how we start to build an economy that it actually is growing out. So, it reaches the marginalized in the middle and not just up to the well-connected. And there's some great ideas out there. I won't get into all the policy stuff. And I must say, I hate that, what's the first 100 days stuff, because it's hard to get a lot done in the first 100 days. Everybody points to FDR. And I do love that model, but it is really tough at a time when legislators feel that action is not is sort of not what the public wants. The public wants. I think they're wrong about that, but I think a lot of legislators and the Congress feel that going slow and not innovating and trying things and being bold is somehow not in the role. I think that there are some things that I mentioned one policy choice, just one, and I do think, and it relates to the question about finding our way back to each other. I do think that there needs to be a democracy agenda. We have treated our democracy for a long time as if it would tolerate limitless abuse without breaking. The amount of money, much of it dark, in our politics, the hyper-partisan gerrymandering, the vote suppression, they're even doing poll taxes, and the effective equivalent in Florida with former felons who were restored the franchise by popular vote in the election in 2018. There are things like this that, the influence of lobbyists on legislation and policy making. There are things like this that just need to be smoothed out so that it is as easy and as secure to vote as possible, to register and stay registered. This purging stuff is really insidious. Restoring the Voting Rights Act, that sort of thing, I think incredibly important. House 1, which was moved out of this House, this Congress's House, has had no action in the Senate, but it has a lot of these pieces in it, and I think that's enormously important. I think it would change everything if our members of Congress actually had to appeal to a wide range of views in their congressional districts, instead of having districts designed so that an individual congressman or an individual party has foregone control. I think that he has to use his ultimate power, or at least what I found was the ultimate power of a governor, which is the convening authority. You get people to accept your invitation and come and sit at your conference table, and frequently, in my case, they came and sat with people they'd never talked to or hadn't talked to outside of my office, and that kind of problem solving made for, I think, more lasting and more meaningful solutions to those problems, and that's a great thing to do. So in the nature of modeling that he is going to be everyone's president, not just the president of the Democrats. And then, I, like everyone, am struck by how divided we are, but I'm even more struck by how easy it has been to divide us and is to divide us. And I think it's easy to divide us because we don't know each other. All we get is the cartoon version of one another, usually from the opposite side. We don't have the experience of being exposed to to each other. And I think one of the things we should be pushing is universal service, national service. We're probably never going to have compulsory service like Israel does, for example. And I don't frankly care whether that service is military or civilian, domestic or abroad, but I think the idea of having the expectation that you spend meaningful time doing meaningful work alongside other Americans who are from different places and different perspectives, meeting an unmet need is an important way for us to start to give each other a benefit of the doubt. And maybe in the long run, understanding that we have a stake in this national community, each of us does.
And regarding Senator Harris, how do you,
yes.
you know, the celebration a couple Saturdays ago and the follow-up was just wonderful. And how do you view her election? And when you look at the racial, the impact on the social and economic justice in the Black community, what do you sense will be the impact of her election?
I think it's enormously important and very, very exciting. I think she was an inspired choice by Joe Biden, and I think she'll be a terrific vice president. I think I like firsts. I love the idea that she's the first woman vice president. I love the idea that she's the first African-American vice president, the first South Indian American vice president. The first graduate in HBCU, the first who is a member of a Black sorority. There's so many firsts, and I love the fact that she embraces them all. I think that's pretty exciting. But I think she knows, as we all do, that as Doug Jones used to say, Doug Wilder, the first Black governor in America, was the governor of Virginia, the first elected since Reconstruction. And he said when he introduced me once, he said, being first doesn't mean a thing unless there's a second. And I think his point was that we've got to be about making this less unusual. We've got to be about expanding who gets to come and sit at the table, who gets exposed to the kinds of ambitions and preparation for assignments like that, assignments like I had, assignments like you have. And that has to be a part of the agenda. Having that example is a big part of it, is a very, very important thing. But driving an agenda that makes it possible, not just to imagine the destination, but to have the tools to build toward it, I think is part of the work we all have to do right now.
Yeah, I mentioned 100 days. You mentioned FDR. The reason my reference on that was going back, to LBJ, and of course there was what he got through.
Extraordinary.
During the beginning of, so that's my reference point for that question. You talk about first. You must be proud today to see your appointment to the Boston Municipal Court. Serge Georges,
yes,
who grew up in Dorchester. I was St. Peter's, he was St. Kevin's. I'm older than him, but I do know him well.
Mm-hmm.
He was appointed yesterday. You must feel awful good about that.
I'm very proud of him. We had a nice exchange of messages yesterday. I'm very, very proud of him.
Yeah.
As I am with our new about our new chief. Also, we took judicial appointments. I hope you'll agree, very seriously, and there is no dearth of legal talent in Massachusetts. We're very blessed that way. So we had a lot of really strong candidates to choose from, but the ones who stood out were the ones who understood the connection between the pleadings and the people, that these were real souls actually trying to figure out not just how to get to the correct decision, but the just one. in many cases. And that's not easy. It's not easy. And it's impossible, in my view, unless you are able to see the people beyond the pleadings.
I'd like to talk about, like to talk about the podcast that you started. And what I found, you may recall this, you may not, but one of the founders was Louis Brandeis. And Michael Bonin, who used to be a partner here, he now works for the Adelson Family Foundation, knows all the history about Louis Brandeis. So I came across an article that he recommended, and Mike Mooney found it for me. And he gave a speech on July 5th, 1915, at Faneuil Hall, when he was given the oath of citizenship to immigrants, 1915. And you talked about democracy, and I'm quoting, democracy rests upon two pillars. One, the principle that all men are equally entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the other, the conviction that such equal opportunity will most advance civilization. Just beautifully written. In July 15th, 1915. July 5th.
Send it to me. I'd love to read that.
Oh, I will. And Mike Mooney found it for me, and it's, I have a site. If folks want the site else to cover it, I'll send it to you as well. But tell us about the podcast, Being American. Where's it? What's making you create it? What are you thinking about? What do you want to accomplish? What kind of people are you going to interview?
Well, I'm still learning how to do podcasting, but it really is about having conversations that I've found are hard to have in the context of a campaign, but are probably essential for us to refresh in the context of our democracy. And I've felt this for some while, but especially during this hyper-partisan and divisive time we're living in, that there are, this notion of community where we have a stake in each other. That's a national idea too, and it's particularly important, I think, in a country formed not around geography or language or religion, as most other countries are, but around a handful of civic ideals, the very ones that you quoted from Justice Brandeis. And those civic ideals make demands on us about how we think about, or ought to, in my view, about how we think about our fellow citizens and our role as citizens. So I wanted to engage some folks around that conversation, just see whether there were in fact common values in these uncommon times that might form the bridge back to each other, or to each other in many cases for the first time. I really wanted to talk to just regular people, because there are conversations of this kind that if you give people a chance and you speak with them and not at them, they come forward, they tell you things, they let you in. I found this was one of the most amazing things about being governor, was because we were out so much, and people were surprised to see me get this sort of double take, which I always attributed to the fact that I'm taller on TV. But then, they'd say something. You could see them working it out. And it was more often than not, neither a criticism nor a compliment. It was some tiny little and frequently intimate insight into how they were living their lives. And if you were out a lot and you were listening a lot, you begin to hear consensus points, and it would, I think, affect how and improve how we made policy. I think the same is true when it comes to what it means to be American, or ought to mean in 2020. If you engage, you kind of get over abstractness of the question or the corniness of it or the way we squirm about patriotism and so forth and get into it, it can be really revealing. The folks who are helping me said, you got to get some well-known folks to come on so folks will just pay attention. And what we will do over time is start to take ordinary people's, everyday people's answers to that question, kind of drop them in as we've gone along. But we've had some really, really interesting conversations. I'm actually going to record one this afternoon with Misty Copeland, the first Black principal at American Ballet Theater. So at the top of her game in one of the top ballet companies in America, where we have some business leaders coming on. We had Anand Giridharadas as one of the first guests, who's a former columnist at the New York Times. Anyway, some really interesting people. Some you know, some you don't know yet, but you ought to.
Well, let me turn the tables around a bit and ask you that basic question. What does it mean to you to be an American today?
Well, I do believe that, and I'm, with the caveat that the podcast is in part about my own search for that answer.
Right.
But I still think that our strength comes from the combination of these transcendent civic ideals of equality, opportunity, and fair play, without which freedom is impossible. Without those, freedom doesn't work. So I think the notion that we are the only nation in human history organized around these civic ideals, combined with the fact that our charge in any given generation is to close the gap between our reality and our ideals. I think those two things in common are what make us great. I think our power is diminished when we give up on closing that gap, or when we take a breath from pausing that gap, or when we've said, well, we've closed that gap enough for those of us who are here, but not for those who just arrived, or enough for this group, but and that's enough, and we're not going to pay attention to that group over there. We have the opportunity to be the only polyglot nation on earth, a nation of the world, and I think that is a unique strength of ours. It's an identifying strength of ours if we give it a chance. And what inspires me is how in fits and starts we give it a chance. We gave it a chance in a fit, and that made a way for me. But it's like we haven't quite decided we're going to be that all the time. And so I think being American has something to do with making a personal commitment to these civic ideals, and not being a bystander about that commitment, but actually, behaving privately and publicly in ways consistent with it.
Well, I think it's a great question, and it's a question, since I learned about it 6 weeks ago. It launched around October 9th, I think, around that week, or 6th, around that week there. And everybody's going to answer it differently.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised.
Well, admittedly, I've been thinking about my own answer to it.
Mm-hmm.
And based on my age, based on where I am, based on family, based on all those things now, my answer may not have been the same 10 years ago that it is today. And
fair enough. Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of self-examination, which is not bad, as you know. And so I look forward to watching them, and I've seen one, and I look forward to watching one, and good luck with it. And I think I'm looking forward. I've seen some of the names of people like James Taylor and folks like that. I'm looking forward to to that and others, but good luck with it. And thank you for sharing that with us. One subject that we do want to talk about, you were scheduled to give the keynote address at the NAACP annual conference. And I had Tanisha Sullivan here as a guest. First week of March, last week in February, and she came and spoke to my breakfast and luncheon group, as you have done in the past. And she was outstanding. And I didn't know we were the first chapter of the NAACP. I didn't know that until I invited her. And she was excellent. And so because it was canceled and so forth, I did read your remarks that were in the Boston Magazine. And one quote, racism is at the root of the wealth and income gaps between blacks and whites. It is the cause of disparities in healthcare outcomes. It is why we still see persistent housing segregation, food shortages, and criminal sentencing discrepancies. And there were other comments like that in your remarks. Could you please talk about that statement, particularly, but also just the broader remarks that you were going to make, that you were intended to make at the NAACP convention?
I can try, Bill. I mean, this is one of those one of a handful of issues that it feels to me we're only starting to talk about public, in the general public, with real candor and a connection to our past. In other words, you know, if for example, much of middle class wealth, generational wealth, was for a generation or two or three built on equity in a home, think about what the impact was for so long when those homes were being bought, of redlining decisions and the inability to get a mortgage, or the and some of which continues today, and it takes other forms. It takes the form of differentials in the rates of mortgages. It takes the form of differentials in the appraisals. But that has a compounding effect. So if you're growing up in a middle class household, in my, you know, in my vintage, and your family's middle class because they own the first house, it's very likely that family is owned in generations. Very likely that house that you know, my family could not have bought that house, might not have been able to afford to buy that house because they couldn't get a job that paid what that, you know, what your dad earned. Might not have been able to get that job that paid that much because they didn't get the education that you got. And this notion that there isn't a compounding effect over generations of decisions that we have come to accept is something that I think we miss. It doesn't mean that it isn't possible to overcome, but it isn't going to be overcome by just saying, okay, we're going to take that barrier away, and, you know, good luck. Everybody's racing. Everybody's moving down the path. Someone has a you know, a mile lead on you, and you were just told now you can start, and good luck. You're not going to catch up. You're not going to catch up. Not if you're running at the same pace with the same capabilities and so forth. There are reasons why these disparities exist. There are reasons why we've seen the impact of COVID disproportionately on Black and brown people and on poor people. It shouldn't surprise anybody. Folks are already health compromised. They already don't have access to regular checkups and a regular doctor visit. It's marvelous that we've been focused on universal insurance and access to healthcare. But the fact is, if you are poor, you may have an insurance card, but you may not have a doctor. And that isn't all about race, but it has been about race for a long time. And so I think getting deeper into why we have the disparities we do, it's so interesting to me how few folks in the North realize that the trend away from public education began in the South after Brown versus Board of Education, when white families withdrew their kids from the public schools and started first to advocate for parochial education and then for other forms of independent education, publicly funded, because they didn't want to abide by the Supreme Court's decision that blacks and whites should go to the same school. Well, the roots of today's movement away from public education have their roots, are there in those choices. And so I love the idea that we doubled the number of the cap on charter schools. I love the idea that we have a school choice plan, but I hate the idea that we aren't focused on how we make education consistently excellent, no matter where you live. We are focused on things that have their origins in trying to keep people apart, instead of trying to make things right for everybody, and through that to bring us back together. So it doesn't mean, I'm not one of those folks who thinks we haven't made any progress in this country since, slavery. But I'm also not one of those folks who thinks that all we needed to do was to free the slaves. I just think we've made extraordinary progress in this country on race, much of it in my own lifetime. And it's part of why I find this country so inspiring, that we are able to reinvent ourselves, and we have the mechanisms in our institutions and in our Constitution to do just that. But I am also clear that some of the choices we make today and some of the things we accept as just the way things are the result of choices made on the basis of race a long time ago. And simply saying we're not going to be race conscious anymore doesn't quite get at how to make a permanent solution.
Have you had a chance to read the new John Lewis book? I read it recently, and I read a book by Professor Kendi. Very interesting books and about these issues. And I had never read Professor Kendi before. He's now over at BU, and I'm interested to see what people think of that book. We're getting near the end, and one topic you do talk about in your remarks was about hope. What is your hope for us, for Black Americans, in the future? And you do reference it in your article. What do you see or hear out there that makes you optimistic? And
well, I am very hopeful. I think I think in the piece I talk about how all these folks, many of them young, not all of them, who've been out in the streets, overwhelmingly peaceful, and across all kinds of differences. It feels like there's a generation putting its collective foot down and saying, you know what, we can and we must do better. That liberty and justice belong together. They reside with each other. That we actually do have a stake in our neighbors' dreams and struggles, as well as she and he in ours. And that makes me hopeful. I am also hopeful, and I'm hedging a little bit because I worry about this. And this is to borrow from a wonderful turn of phrase I heard from Anand Giridharadas, where he said, the question today is whether the woke are going to leave room for the still waking. And I do think that is the challenge of our time. I love the fact that folks are thinking big and broad and about fundamental reforms to make us both prosperous and just. But I think it's enormously important to bring along the folks who don't already agree with us or who aren't all the way there. And that isn't about being less bold. It is about being more humble, because I've discovered, I don't have a corner on all the best ideas, and neither does anybody else. And the more we can bring each other in and listen to each other, the more meaningful and more lasting I think our solutions ultimately are.
I wrote to you, we have a mutual friendship with Reverend Peter Gomes, and as you know, and the chaplain at Harvard, who was a friend of mine and spoke here at Nutter, and of course close to you when you were at Harvard and afterwards. But I often wonder what he would think about today. And I often wonder, and I thought about other people. I wrote,
This is voice, yeah.
What would he think? As we wrap up, Governor, we've covered a lot of territory today, a lot of topics that with just on the surface, but I'm very grateful. And we could go on for a long time. You and I could go along for a long time. But as we close, I want to thank everybody, and I want to ask you, Governor, do you have any final comments to make, and what you'd like to leave us with today?
Well, Bill, I just want to thank you for having me, and I want to thank everybody for joining. I love the idea. I mean, it is tiring to stare at the little dot on your screen all day long, as so many of us do. But I know that for lots of folks, especially folks who are managing depression, mental illness, and to have the isolation so many of us are experiencing is tough. But finding ways to connect and to connect meaningfully, I think is maybe not just necessary, but exactly what the doctor ordered. And being able to do this with you is exactly that for me. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I was looking forward to it so much, and I want to thank you. And I agree with you. I miss just my general routine in a lot of ways, and not seeing people, and you write notes and you try to stay in touch.
Yeah.
But it's not the same. But again, thank you so much. I want you and your family to stay well, and please give my regards. And thank you again, and stay in touch. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you all. Thanks. Bye, Governor.